And like 8 days before IO, Josh was like, what if we put it inside of Notebook? Like, what would it look like if audio overviews became a feature inside of Notebook? And I had a moment of like, what? And then I thought, oh, wait, we're building a tool for understanding things. One of the primary like modalities that people use to understand things is listening to a conversation between two engaged people. Like that's why people love podcasts, is they remember it. They can listen to it when they're driving. They can do it. If we could generate amazing podcasts based on people's sources, that's exactly in our sweet spot of our mission.
This is AI First with Adam and Andy, the show that takes you straight to the front lines of AI innovation in business. I'm Andy Sack, and alongside my co-host, Adam Brotman, each episode, we bring you candid conversations with business leaders transforming their businesses with AI. No fluff, just real talk and actionable use cases and insights. I'm so excited for today's episode. Welcome, Stephen Johnson from Google. Stephen, super happy to have you on. Thank you for making time. I think today's episode is why every exec will soon rely on an AI notebook as a second brain. That's how I want to frame the episode. And I thought Stephen would be the perfect person to talk about that. Stephen, can you give us a little bit about your background? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I've been a friend of Andy Sachs for something like 35 years. Incredibly long time.
You lost track.
Yeah, that's true. But in addition to that extraordinary accomplishment,
and that is an accomplishment.
Yeah, I spent most of my career as a writer. I did a couple of startups over the years at various different points, but most of my career I've written books and done kind of spinoffs of that. I did a couple of TV series and podcasts and things like that. So I've written 14 books on nonfiction, history of science and innovation, and a bunch of different topics. But I had kind of always been very interested in using technology to help me with the writing process and the research process, as you say, as kind of a second brain, organizing my ideas. And it's partially because of that obsession that I ended up at Google.
So we have professional author Stephen Johnson. Stephen, I'm just curious, on your author side, what is your favorite of your books?
Yeah, it's a little like which is your favorite kid, which is you do have an answer, but it keeps changing. So you get kind of sick of some of the books, but like I write kind of history books that have multi-layered but kind of narrative structures, and then I have idea books. And so of my idea books, there's a book I wrote called Wonderland about the history of play and curiosity, and how it's been a major driver of innovation over the last 10,000 years. That's kind of my favorite idea book. And the narrative ones, I don't know. The last one I wrote, The Infernal Machine, about dynamite and the birth of terrorism and NYPD. I'm pretty proud of that one.
All right, we gave you two plugs. We've got Wonderland and what was the second book that you just did?
The Infernal Machine.
And now NotebookLM.
Yeah, so I love it.
Most people, most of our listeners, I think, know NotebookLM, but can you just give like a short intro to NotebookLM?
Yeah, we think of Notebook, and actually, AI first is a really great phrase to use for NotebookLM, because we really built it, and I can tell you the backstory of how we came to build it, but we were really trying to build an AI native application, i.e. not add AI to an existing word processor or add AI to an existing slide creation tool, but really trying to think about like, what does software look like when you start with the premise that there's going to be a language model at the center of the application from the beginning. Like, surely it's not just a chatbot. Surely there are other UIs that you can create. So we think over time, we've come to think of NotebookLM as a tool for understanding things. That's fundamentally what it is. Everything in the application is designed to help you make sense of the information that you need to understand to do your job. And so all of the interactions. This is the kind of like core principle that was there from the beginning of the product 3 years ago, when this was a very unusual idea. It's now become more common. All of your interactions inside of NotebookLM are grounded in the documents and the sources that you give it. And so every time you ask a question, the model will only answer based on the sources you've uploaded. And so everything is designed to help you understand the content of those sources and use that understanding to create things.
Can you talk about how it evolved, right? So you just described, Andy asked you to describe NotebookLM, like, and for those that haven't used it, it's, maybe you could describe a little bit about how it works, but like, how did it, so you mentioned like you wanted to create an AI first, knowledge assistant application, but like, how did it come about? Like, I mean,
Adam, let me just add, Stephen, go way back. Like go way back to 35 years ago, because okay. I remember like bring our listeners along that whole journey.
5,000 years ago, the Egyptian scribes first created, I'm working on a history of like note-taking in notebooks, actually. So I could go back 5,000 years, but I will not, because we only have 30 minutes here. So yeah, I mean, I think that the story that dates back to when you and I first met, Andy, probably this is, I would say, a year before we met. We were both in college together, and in the sophomore year of my college experience in 1987, Apple released a program called HyperCard, and HyperCard was I describe it as like the Velvet Underground of software. Like it never had any like hits. It never became like a huge hit, but it influenced a whole generation of people who went on to create other software. And it was this kind of pre-web hyperlinking personal knowledge management tool that it was allegedly going to be Apple's next big thing after the Mac interface, but it never really took off except for some hardcore people. And I used it to build a tool to manage all of my notes and research for my classes at college. And I called it curriculum. And it was like, I had this like idea that if I had software that could help me like keep track of everything, I would be able to learn more, and I would be able to understand the material more richly, write better papers, all the things you want. And I got so obsessed with like building this tool that I like stopped going to the classes that the tool was ostensibly trying to help me perform in. So it was like a first taste of what was possible there. And it actually set me up in a way, in a very important part of sense of my career, because when the web came along kind of 6 years later, I was able to kind of understand the significance of it in a way because HyperCard had prepared me for it. But it also just sent me on this journey of knowledge management tools. And through the years, I used a software called DevonThink. I dabbled with Evernote and, Obsidian and all these tools. I was a major user of Scrivener, which is kind of a knowledge management and writing tool. Just like whatever some new kind of way of manipulating information, storing information came along, I would try it out. And I wrote about the way that I would use these tools. So I would write blog posts, Medium posts, Substack posts about how I use software to help me think and to organize the ideas for my books and stuff like that. So I had a little side hustle as a early adopter and evangelist for these knowledge management tools, second brain tools. And then in the spring of 2022, so, kind of 7 months before ChatGPT, I wrote a 10,000 word article for the New York Times Magazine, basically mostly about GPT-3. It was, but it was a little bit about some of Google's models. And it was basically saying, hey, people, this is the real deal. Like, yes, there are problems with these language models. Yes, they hallucinate. Yes, they are unreliable in some ways. But this is the most significant technological transformation of my lifetime. And what you cannot do is just say that it's hype. This is something that's going to be absolutely a paradigm shift for how technology works, and take it seriously. And that piece was the most controversial piece I have ever written in my life. Like the pushback on Twitter was unbelievable. Like all these people being like, oh, he fell for the hype. He doesn't realize they're just stochastic parrots. This is so sad that Steven Johnson, so naive. And so I had a miserable time when that piece came out, even though I'm very proud of that piece. And I think it has, stood the
Wait, let's just pause for a second.
Yeah.
You wrote a 10,000 word piece for New York Times Magazine before the ChatGPT public release saying, everybody, these LLMs are kind of a big deal. And
yes,
and it's the real deal. Like, that's pretty significant, man. That was pretty prescient, and you obviously were spot on. And it is interesting that you got pushback, but I just want to pause and say, like, that's a pretty telling sign that you were on it.
Well, I'll add somewhere in there, Stephen, like we had, you and I, we've known each other a long time and been friends for a long time, but we had lost touch. Somewhere along there, it was shortly after that article that we had dinner at our mutual friend's house in Brooklyn. And you were talking about the article. So I think you had not yet joined Google. You were talking to Google.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically Google, so the one good thing that came out of that article, besides the reason why all the abuse was worth it online, is that Josh Woodward and Clay Bavor at Google, Clay had just started Labs. He's since left to start Sierra, but he had spun up Labs inside of Google, and Josh was working with him. And they were both longtime readers of my stuff. They'd read my book, Where Good Ideas Come From. They were reading my Substack, and they'd read this article. And apparently Clay turned to Josh at some point and was like, hey, I wonder if we could get Steven Johnson to come and give like an inspirational speech to the team. And Josh was like, wonder if we could actually get Steven to come and build something. Because they had this ethos inside of Labs that they were thinking about of co-creating with outsiders, like bringing people, if you're going to make a product for writers, like bring a writer and have them in the room from the beginning and not just, do focus groups with them or UXR. So they cold called me. Like, Clay sent me an email out of the blue and was like, hey, you don't know me, but I got a crazy idea for you. And they kind of pitched me. They said, hey, come, we've got a small team, like, a couple of engineers, a designer, and we can just prototype something and you can get access to our latest models and we'll see what happens. You can come 50% time. And so I said, yeah, that sounds really fun. And I genuinely thought that like we would build some interesting prototypes. It would be a fun adventure. I'd meet some interesting people. I'd get access to these models, which were at that point behind, closed doors. And I would learn a lot. But I kind of was like, Google must have 1,000 prototypes that they're building at any given time. Like, nothing will come of this publicly, but it'll be a fun ride. And then basically, we built this early prototype in October of 2022 that had source grounding. Was the first thing that we kind of built into it. You could upload your own documents. I was taking my like quotes from books that I'd read, which was always my obsession as a writer. So it'd be like, okay, I've taken all these quotes from my research and I want to upload those, and then I want to be able to ask questions about the quotes, like so I can remember things or I can kind of see connections. And so we had that running in October of 2022. And I think when ChatGPT hit, there was a little bit of a sense of like, oh, what do we have that's kind of like native to AI that's in the works here? And it turned out like Notebook, our little prototype, was one of the most kind of furthest along of any of the things that were happening. And so the team got kind of a little bit bigger, and slowly over time, we kind of launched in the US as an experiment, and then we launched internationally, and then we launched audio overviews about a year and a half later.
How did that come about? Yeah, first of all, I'm as someone who didn't know any of that, like, so you're saying that Google, the company who through the various branches of Google, I think it was the Deep Brain team, wrote the Attention Is All You Need and basically pioneered transformer models, and that led to LLMs. That Google, who also had the DeepMind team in London, I guess, probably still, even though they owned them, and AlphaGo, when ChatGPT hit, they're like, oh, where do we have some native AI stuff? Right? Like, that's amazing to me, right? Like,
yeah, they had they were really they actually had the chat interface with a model that was called Lambda. They had that super early, but way before ChatGPT, and that was one of the first things that I tested. So they had made a decision not to make those models public, which was I actually think was actually a kind of a valiant choice because they weren't really ready in a way. But so they had done a lot of like great work, but there just weren't a lot of like fully realized kind of native applications. And there's a good reason for that, which is the models just weren't good enough. We built Notebook like knowing generally what the trajectory was going to be in terms of improving the models. And there was a long stretch of time where, you just wouldn't get reliable answers, or the grounding wasn't good enough, or if you had more than a couple hundred, a couple thousand words of source material, it got fuzzier because the context wasn't big enough. So I think there was a reason to not be shipping things. But we just had an approach that was distinct. The source grounding approach, that was genuinely like
that was spot on. The source grounding, and then so before we get to let's turn it to enterprise in a second. But just staying with the origin, because this is interesting. I didn't know this. I'm learning, and I'm guessing anyone listening to this is finding this interesting as well. Like so Google, through you and this NotebookLM early effort in late 2022, is building something for writers. Like who is your intended audience? Students, writers, researchers, and then talk a little bit about how that, and then also when did audio overviews kick in?
Yeah. Okay, so two important points here, I think. There was a very early stage, that early stage in like the fall of 2022. It was like there was a user of one, like audience of one. Like it was like, what would Stephen need? And we kind of just like, it enabled us to go quickly because it was just like whatever Stephen's workflow is, let's just like build a tool for that. And so that was helpful for like 2 months. But then quickly, like we got a proper product manager, Riza Martin joined. We staffed up a little bit, and then it was like, okay, it can't just be Stephen here. We need to broaden the audience. But what we chose to do, and we had to fight for this a little bit, is like we think this is actually like a big platform, and so while we will think about very specific user journeys as we develop this, we are not going to define like people kept saying like, is this for students? Is this for writers? And we'd be like, yes. And it's for knowledge workers. It's for anyone who works with information that is scattered across a large number of documents, who has to pull insights and make connections and understand the material that is scattered across a lot of those documents. So whoever like fits in that category, those are our users. And we kind of just chose not to be too focused in those early days. And that may not be the way that you're supposed to do it, but it's the way that we did it, because we didn't want to get like, we thought it was a bigger platform than just a student play or just a writer play. So the audio overviews thing is really cool. It's another great lab story. So there was another team inside of Labs that had developed this amazing podcast generator using these new conversational voice models that Google had. So there was some like amazing new voice technology. There were kind of voices trained on people in conversation. It wasn't two voices that you stitched together in a script. It was like these two people had sat in a room for hundreds of hours and talked to each other, and the model built an understanding of how they converse with each other.
Interesting.
So we had that tech, and then we had kind of grounding in the idea like, oh, we could create a script based on your documents that could have the feeling of an engaging podcast with two fabulous hosts, just like we have right here. And so I'd heard the demo. It was really funny. I'd heard the demo. I was like, that's amazing. And it like never occurred to me to put it inside of NotebookLM. Like I was talking about, look, like, you have blind spots even if you know the product as well as I do. And it was right before I/O and, our big annual conference in 2024. And Josh Woodward, who at this point was running Labs, it was such a cool demo, but it didn't live in any product. And we didn't want to show something at I/O that was like, here's a prototype of something. We didn't even know where this goes.
Right.
And like 8 days before I/O, Josh was like, what if we put it inside of Notebook? Like, what would it look like if audio overviews became a feature inside of Notebook? And I had a moment of like, what? And then I thought, oh, wait, we're building a tool for understanding things. Right. One of the primary like modalities that people use to understand things is listening to a conversation between two engaged people. Like that's why people love podcasts, is they remember it. They can listen to it when they're driving. They can do it. If we could generate amazing podcasts based on people's sources, that's exactly in our sweet spot of our mission. And so that's like, from that moment on, I was like, I'm sold, let's do it. And so we like raced for like 7 days to get this into a functioning demo that Josh could show on stage at IO. And then finally released it like 3 or 4 months later in the fall of 2024. And it just like, it's the most viral thing I've ever been associated with in my career. Like it just took off, like, you know, everybody was buzzing about it. And it just kind of launched us, which was great.
And can you talk in generalities at whatever you're, you know, allowed to talk about publicly about, you know, launch and results and usage?
Yeah. I mean, I think I can say we have like millions of active users. And to give you some sense of it, like, you know, almost instantly from the growth rates we were seeing, both Workspace and Cloud and Workspace for Education all said, okay, we need a version of NotebookLM that we can sell to our customers. And so we spent actually 3 or 4 months just like helping those teams assemble those versions of Notebook. And so now it's like, it's become a, you know, a major part of kind of the suite of applications that Google offers. And we're just seeing, you know, I mean, we're continuing to grow at a kind of slightly scary rate since then.
And, so, and that serendipity of adding in the audio overviews turned out to be a critical genius move.
Yeah. And as I said, it was not my idea at all. So it's important to remember, like, you know, you have to let other people be the geniuses sometimes. One of the things about it was, by the time audio overviews came out, the models had we'd moved over to Gemini at that point, 1.5, which was really like the breakthrough for us. And it was a good product, but it was very hard to show people or share how it's like. The best way to experience how good a product it was to load up a bunch of very complicated documents that you knew very well and to ask a very sophisticated question and get back a long answer with inline citations that take you to the exact passage of the original source so you can read and fact check and all this stuff, which is incredibly powerful in so many different cases, but it doesn't play well on like TikTok or Twitter, right? Like it's not something you can just share and have people be blown away by, but even though it's very impressive. But audio overviews gave us that thing. So suddenly all these people on TikTok were like uploading their journals and turning them into podcasts and then sitting there like, right, you know, filming themselves listening to these AI hosts discussing their lives and being blown away by it. So it gave us a viral thing that we didn't have.
It's incredibly impressive, your insight, not just your New York Times magazine article, but your insight on this product. And by the way, you say you built it for you. I can totally relate to that. Like I think I drive my friend and my co-founder crazy sometimes because I want to just build products for myself, which is not actually probably, in fact, Andy would tell us that's not the best practice probably for how you develop a software product. However, when it works, right? And there's a little bit of like the creative genius part where you're just like, look, I don't know how to like research this stuff. I just want to build something that I insanely know I want to use. And if I do it well, it'll work out. Now, in this case, when I discovered NotebookLM, it was in the fall of 24 when you introduced audio overviews with Gemini 1.5, I think, behind it, and it went viral. And, you know, one of our favorite podcasters, Paul Raitzer, was mentioning, like, you got to check this out. This is like the coolest thing I've seen since I saw ChatGPT. And you're right. Like it was the like advanced audio combination with the source engineering that went into it that just made it just mind blowing. That was, you know, what people were so excited about. But for me, and I say this all the time, I think I said it online, you saw it, I was like, it's not, which makes me feel good because it was your original intent as the co-founder of this, which was that I look at it and I go, oh, this is the best application and user flow I've ever seen for being able to sort of get to answers from multiple sources. And which ultimately is, I think, AI's superpower. I think AI's superpower is helping you as an executive or an individual or anybody to just go, there's these disparate sources. In the case of NotebookLM, you kind of need to know your sources, which now I understand the background. And I know you guys are working on it sort of being supplemented by internet search. But like the notion of like, I've got these unstructured data sources that I know are like somewhere in there. If I could put them in a pot of stew and I could make my answers in there somewhere, which is what you said was your original sort of inspiration. And then you take advantage of the long context capabilities of Gemini. You build this thing the right way, and voila, you've got this ultimate like custom GPT on steroids is another way to think of it. And that's really what it is. And so you came out with the audio overviews, it went viral. And I like the audio overviews as much as anybody. They're the most sort of magical part of it. And on the one hand, yet when I'm talking to executives now about NotebookLM, and it's part of our standard training for C-suites as our AI boot camps, we point out NotebookLM. We talk about the audio overview still because you have to, and they're amazing. But I pointed out that it's actually the power in it is in really getting to insights around something that you were sort of close to because you know the sources are. And we're good at like, I know somewhere in those sources is my answer. I'm going to put these things together and get an answer. So that's how I describe NotebookLM. How do you describe, like when somebody says they've never heard of NotebookLM and they're in the business context, how do you describe like the best use cases?
Yeah. So let me just say very quickly, one quick thing on what you said at the very beginning there, which is on kind of like building products for yourself. Like, I think the important thing is that's a great way to start in building a product because you can go quickly. But the other thing is you have to learn, and I had to learn this kind of quickly, I think, but I had to learn it. You have to be able to then widen it and give up your own kind of personal obsessions and let other people in the team like add their own obsessions to the mix. So there's so many things that have happened like in the last 2 years since that early prototype have come from other people on the team. And I'm like, it's no longer at all like the Steven project. So and audio overviews is the best example of that. Mind maps is another feature that like came from like a junior engineer that has been amazing, has really taken off. So in terms of the enterprise use, I think, you've described it well, right? That to do your job, if you're a CEO or you're head of the marketing department, or you are working on a startup and you're trying to like build a company, there's just a lot of information that is scattered across a lot of different documents that you need to work with in one form or another to get what you're doing. I think there's a very like factual lookup kind of use of NotebookLM that you invoke that is definitely part of it. Like, what was our Q1 forecast? I can't remember the exact number. You can just natural language query it. You'll get the answer. You can quickly go read the original document. Amazing. But there's more than that. And I think that the thing is that these models are now capable of really like a deep understanding of the material and doing kinds of pattern recognition and analysis that is just insane. Like no computer in the world could do this kind of thing 2 years ago, and now you can do it in a free app. So one great example is I have a fake notebook for a fake company that I've created, which is a smart composting company called Smarter Compost. It's a high-tech composting company, and I use it to like test new features and new models in this kind of like enterprise environment. In this case, it's a startup, and so I've built out like user interviews, sales call transcripts, fake board meetings, like fake product description sheets, fake business plan, that I have this whole, like, I'm going to start this company, I think, because I've gotten like so into the world of this company. So one of the things you can do is you can say things like, based on that last, those last 10 user research interviews, identify the top 5 pain points for the users. Give me a quote from each user about each of the pain points and briefly describe what the pain point is. and it'll just go through like 100 pages of raw transcripts and figure out what the overarching pain points are, organize and create this amazing kind of like almost like briefing doc of those pain points. And then you can be like, all right, yeah, tell me a little bit more about number 3. You can drive into that a little bit more. And then you can be like, okay, suggest 2 specific improvements to the product based on that user feedback. And it'll be like, oh, you could change this, you could change that. And so you really can, co-create with the product. You can have it do very high level, like that kind of like thematic analysis of 100 pages of raw transcripts. Like, how long does that take a human to do it by hand? It takes like 10 hours to do that kind of analysis, maybe more. Notebook will do it in 10 seconds.
When you just said that, tell me if you agree, Stephen. So let's the 3 of us talk about like just the power of AI for AI first organizations, and sort of how people can just be thinking about the not just NotebookLM, but AI in general, and how NotebookLM is, I think, so interestingly positioned, which is that you can take in the world today, what I'm finding the most interesting thing about LLMs, or about AI systems in general, is when you throw a lot of different types, even of unstructured data at the LLMs, and don't try to don't be scared of like of mixing those things together. Like to your point, transcripts with structured data, with documents, with presentations. Like I've found, particularly recently, because of these, thinking models, and because of and they're agentic almost themselves. When you just give a lot of disparate but related information to the LLMs, they're just incredibly good at like quickly going through it and synthesizing and giving you insights back. Whereas before, you might have been scared to be like, you're going to confuse it, or you're not giving it the right type of information. Like these LLMs are just incredible about how they can just go through it. And so what I found so interesting about NotebookLM is that it's like a application that is doing that at its heart. Like it's going, here, give me a bunch of sources. I can give you hundreds of sources, actually, if you get the right version of NotebookLM. They can be of different types. And then you can people always say, I want to be able to talk to my data, and I want to be able to get insights from this data. Like you've really, in this one program, kind of hit at, I think, the magic of LLMs and of AI systems, which is that it's not so much your prompt as much as the source engineering. Like when you give as much context to these LLMs as possible, you think like, that's going to confuse them, it's going to get drowned out, or I got to be a smart prompter. It's incredible. They just take it, and I think it's magical how they just make sense of it. In a way that doesn't make sense to me. And can you comment on that? Do you agree that NotebookLM is almost like that in its essence, in a way?
Yeah, 100%. Well, all those things you're saying are very nice, and I do agree with them. I mean, I used to kind of joke,
unlike the Twitter comments that you got at the beginning. To
yeah. No, it's nice to be somewhat validated after all these years. I sometimes would describe in the early days, I mean, this is a very nerdy kind of way to describe it, but it's partially true, is that NotebookLM is basically a UI for allowing you to very easily move things in and out of the model's context window.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of what it's designed to do, is like, oh, I quickly want to give this for them. Because the context window is basically like, hey, AI, pay attention to this. And so a tool that lets you very quickly be like, now I want you to focus on this, now I want you to focus on this, now I want you to focus on this, given that there is a finite amount of context available, and given that the models are massively more accurate and useful when they are given something to focus on. So we've kind of built a tool. And in the one of the things you can do in Notebook that sometimes people don't really realize is all the sources on the left-hand side have check boxes next to them. And you can dynamically uncheck them. Oh, yeah. And whatever is selected at that point, the model is focused on, and whatever is unselected, the model can't even see anymore. And when we were building that, I was there in the very beginning of the product. When we were building it, I remember some folks were like, no one's ever going to understand what that is. Like, no one's going to get that they can dynamically change the context of the model. And like, those boxes are like the third most clicked on thing in the app. Like, people totally get it now once you learn it. But it is a new convention of like, oh, I'm shifting the focus of this AI onto something new.
That's right. But what's so great about that, and why I think people did intuit that, is because if you think about one of the most used things on OpenAI's platform are these custom GPTs, as people call them, right? Where you basically can, like, if you think about what a custom GPT is, it's a structured prompt, right? And you can put some knowledge files, they're called, and then you can write your instructions, and and then you can chat with it, you can share it. Yeah. And yet it's got limitations. It's got context window limitations. It's got model limitations. It's got, it's really a pain in the rear end to actually switch around your knowledge files and stuff like that. You guys took that and put it on steroids in a way, in a sense. And it's like, and I'll tell you, like, when Andy and I see wrapper apps out there in the wild, which is like every app is basically a form of a wrapper app on some level. I mean, they're all just, when I see them, they're all just, like, okay, what's my system prompt? What's my data source? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's my UI? Yeah. And so you guys, what's so great is, like, being able to, like, basically have the equivalent of a custom GPT, but with much more sources, have it be dynamically easy to sort of check and uncheck the sources and really allow the model to focus on what you want it to focus on in that moment. That's pretty cool.
And now what's coming? The next iteration of this that we're going to start rolling out, or depending on when this airs, we will have just rolled out, is basically thinking about Notebook also as a distribution platform for information and knowledge. So one of the single biggest problem we actually have is our onboarding experience is really suboptimal. Like, you get dropped into, like, add sources to this obscure, like, source panel, like, modal that pops up, and a huge number of users are just like, I have no idea what this is, see ya. Like, they sign the terms of service and then they go. But when you've spent some time inside a, like, really nicely curated notebook that has, like, great knowledge and really high quality sources, and maybe there's an audio overview that's already generated that you can listen to, you really see the value of the product. You're like, oh, wow, this knowledge here I can explore in this new way. I can create a mind map. I can do all this stuff. And we think actually that it's a fantastic, like, way to share information with people inside of organizations, for maybe creators to share. And so we're just rolling out now the ability for users to create public notebooks that are just accessible at a URL to anybody who has a Google account. And we think that that's incredibly useful in the business use case. You can see it in people like, oh, hey, we've created our, a basic description of our product line as a notebook, and we've uploaded all our manuals. And so anybody who gets this notebook, instead of, like, reading a PDF, can go into Notebook and ask questions, and your answers will be answered there. Scholars who are publishing important research can publish it as a notebook, so that people can engage, ask questions, understand it at different levels. Say, hey, I'm a 10th grader. I need to understand this complicated scientific paper at a 10th grade level. I want to listen to an audio overview about it. And we're going to start curating notebooks with some partners, where we create a notebook on a given topic. So one example with public domain information is we've got a notebook with all the earnings reports and analyst Q&A for the top 50 companies around the world for Q1. So, like, it's just an amazing compendium of information.
That's
like,
awesome.
If you're a financial analyst, you're trying to understand the impact of tariffs, show me the main trends over these, like, Q1 reports, like, related to tariffs, and you get just an incredible document in 10 seconds.
That's awesome, Stephen. Unfortunately, I think we have to start closing up. My sense is, as Adam was leaning in, that we could continue this conversation easily.
I'll come back anytime, guys.
We'll have you back. Adam, I'm curious. Like, I could tell you were thrilled to have Stephen on today. What jumped out for you from this episode?
Well, two things.
What do you want to call out for our audience?
I think two things to call out. One was surprising. I didn't know we were going to learn this. Like, I think that just understanding the origin story of NotebookLM, and Stephen, your personal background and sort of how you came to Google and whatnot, like, really makes me appreciate NotebookLM in a different light, because it really stood out that this is really, you've been working your whole working life on, like, cool ways that technology can help organize your thinking as a second brain around sources and quotes and other things that you know are relevant, but you want to mix them together and have access to them in a different way. And that LLMs basically allowed you to create a native AI application to do that. And I didn't know that story, and it makes me even appreciate more the platform. And is that the origin story is really relevant to understanding the product so that you can get more use out of it. Because if you actually understand that it was originally developed not to have the audio overview per se, but the audio overview really takes advantage of the original vision of the product, that actually makes sense to me. And it's how I've been explaining to people the power of the product is more about, source engineering your way to some insights. And that's number one. And number two, I loved what you said about how, in a way, to get the most out of an LLM, it really is about context engineering. And how do you make sure that an LLM, which is so powerful, can pay attention to the right things in its context window? And this is a context engineering app, and gives you a lot of control from a UI perspective. So those were the two insights I took from this, which was great.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Stephen, this is a different type of episode than we've ever had on our Nation podcast. Most of our episodes are with business people talking about their AI transformation journey. And in many ways, your story is about, in part, a personal transformation, but also the Google transformation, and how a small team at Google managed to come out with a blockbuster hit by focusing on AI native applications. And I think it really was the first one after ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT was not, they weren't a big company, right? They set out and they just innovated really before Google did. And Google had all the tools. And there's parts of Google's reluctance to release AI into the public that should be applauded. And it really took OpenAI and ChatGPT to initiate and have their viral hit with ChatGPT 3.5. But NotebookLM, like, kudos to Google and to you on both of those, like, for getting a native AI application out there, and 8 days before the Google I/O launching it, like, that story, I think, and the market responded, right? Like, it was the mix really of a career writer, agreeing to, haphazardly to take a half-time job at Google and help lead this team. So I just think it was that whole story really resonated for me, and kudos to Google and kudos to you. Like, it was, this is the first, I think, of what we'll see many native AI applications. I'm really excited, looking forward to seeing what Sam and Johnny Ives, put together. Maybe Apple will get their mojo back and put something out. Microsoft clearly, you're seeing large corporate companies, the large enterprises, introduce native applications, and it's really, really exciting. And NotebookLM was the first, and the success resonates. So that it is partly a digital transformation story. It's just a different kind than the ones that Adam and I focus on. So that's what jumped out at me. Stephen, any closing comments from you for our audience?
I love this conversation, and it has been an amazing ride, and I just want to stress how collaborative it has become. When we tell the origin stories, it's a little like me focused in a way, because it was a small group at the beginning. You didn't
take all the credit.
No, there's so many things that would never have occurred to me that we ended up doing that were brilliant. So it has been the most collaborative, work project of my career. I would
Says
say
the solo author.
Yeah. But I did startups and I did TV shows that were pretty collaborative. But this one,
that's true.
It's a real team effort.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for taking the time and being on. We will have you on again. And with that, thank you all for listening to AI First with Adam and Andy. For more resources on how to become AI First, you can visit our website, forum3.com, download case studies, research briefings, and executive summaries. We have a lot of amazing content and material on the website for those looking to expand their knowledge. We think that you can't overinvest in AI. Thank you.